Oh, it's you. Thanks for stopping by. I was hoping you'd come by today. I just got the fire going, and the winter wind is certainly beginning to blow through the cracks in the cabin. Thanks for coming by, and welcome to another round of cozy horror with me, Dr. Plague. So, I've got 5 stories. You've got nothing better to do, it would seem. So, let's get right to it, shall we? I'd be lying if I said I didn't have my own ways of blowing off a little steam. I've got the ADD pretty bad, so distractions are always good when you're feeling a little anxious, maybe a little ready to climb the walls with just your fingernails. Well, today's writer has a similar problem, but it's a problem that's only amplified when his Karmagami is broken.
I envy these kids nowadays. That probably makes me sound like an old fart, but they really do have a lot more options than we did when we were their age. My youngest is neurodivergent, while my oldest has ADHD, which is bad enough to sometimes give him terrible anxiety. We have any number of things around the house to help with said anxiety. Poppets, fidget spinners, fidget cubes, sensory blankets, you name it, and we probably have it somewhere. My youngest son picked them up early, and they seemed to help him cope with the stress that his autism often brought on. My oldest scoffed at the gadgets my son had, but he left them lying around, and my oldest started playing with them too. Now he doesn't go anywhere without his fidget cube, and his hands seem glued to it around test time. All I had when I was his age was a worry stone, and I probably worried away more than a quarry of them. So when my youngest left his Karmagami on the living room floor one afternoon, my first exposure to it wasn't exactly positive. If you're unaware of what those are, they're these little revolving toys that have different patterns on each of the faces. As you rotate it, the picture changes, and the transitioning images are supposed to be soothing. That, however, was not my initial reaction to them. He had left it in the living room floor beside the couch, right in a blind spot. So as I came around the corner one day, wanting to get a little lunch from the kitchen, I stepped down on the pokey end of the toy. After a few minutes of cursing and hopping around, I was ashamed to see that I had broken my son's new favorite sensory toy. I looked at the time and realized I only had about an hour to find a new one before he came home and had a fit. Quick trip to Walmart and $10 bought me an exact copy, but before I could leave, one of them caught my eye. It was a galaxy scene, the stars and nebulas giving me a strange, serene feeling. I decided to buy one for myself, feeling a little silly for wanting a kid's toy, but getting over it pretty quickly. As I sat at my desk and flipped through the scenes of open space, I felt a serenity I hadn't known since I was very young. I have a certain amount of anxiety myself, and the weird rotating thing soothed me when it all became too much. My wife rolled her eyes at me a little, but I noticed she wasn't in any hurry to get rid of her fidget cube either. So it sat on my desk, and there it was well used and well loved. At least, until recently. I've been working on a book for the last couple of years, and it was finally beginning to come together. It was polished. The test readers I'd let have a look at it said they couldn't wait for the next chapter, and I was excited to get the final draft to my editor after so long. As I edited it, the little toy became the object most often at hand. I would turn it over and over without thinking about it, the galaxy spinning as my tale spun itself closer and closer to completion. I was turning it as I worked my way through the last fourth of the book, when something besides the swirl of the heavens caught my eye. I looked down, seeing the corner of the starry sky, and then I saw something on the face that was not the Galileo space probe, or a black hole. It was eyes. I dropped the thing in surprise, but I had definitely seen a pair of bloodshot eyes. I could swear the veins had pulsed a little, the pupils staring at me, and I had been so startled by the intrusion that I picked my feet up into my chair like I thought it might bite me. I reached down after a few seconds of sitting like that, feeling silly, and when I picked it back up, I could see the familiar black hole and space probe among the bed of stars. I shook it off, thinking I'd just been working too hard. Started flipping the little toy in my hand again. As the words began to fall comfortably into place, I forgot about the eyes. I put it off as an optical illusion. I kept spinning and spinning, stopping only to make edits or change something here and there, and I didn't think about it again until later that night. I was talking with my editor on the phone, telling her about my progress and playing with the Karmagami, when it happened again. I figured I've got about 10 more chapters before I'm done with the third draft. I think then I might be ready to pass it to the proofreader so we can make it ready for publication. The absent-minded flipping was cathartic, my hands busy as my mind whirled over the things I still needed to do. I had to finish the second draft, get the cover art finished, get the final page count, and as I thought about it, my fingers flicked the little toy around and around. The spacescape spun faster and faster, the stars practically winking as I talked to Edith about the upcoming book. I'd forgotten about the eyes, chalking it up to stress, and the little thing hadn't been far from my hand since. "That's great, kid. If they're anything like the last pages you sent me, I can't wait to see them. Did you fix the problem you've been having with the third part?" "Yeah, I think so. I changed it so Mark and Ted move away while he kills Taylor. But the little toy had nearly slipped through my sweaty fingers, and I looked down to see the eyes staring up at me again. They were boring into me, judging me as they glared daggers into my Notre Dame t-shirt. As I watched the eyes, something emerged from the lower lip of the device, and I yelped as something bit me. I dropped the Karmagami and the phone I was talking on, looking down at my bleeding thumb as I shuddered on the couch. My wife and youngest son looked over at me, not sure what had happened, and I heard Edith from the floor asking what was going on. I reached for the phone, but my hands were shaking as the bite on my thumb bled. I apologized for the surprise, but the rest of my answer was a little less excited. When I felt my thumb throb, I looked down to find that the thing was back in my hand. I wanted to drop it, but I just couldn't make my hand release it. The space scene was back again. The eyes and teeth were gone, but my hands shook a little as I flipped through the pictures. I spoke absent-mindedly to Edith, but my eyes kept flicking down to the little puzzle toy. I expected to see the eyes again, but when the call ended, I let the phone slide down to the cushions and took the Karmagami in both hands again. "Boy," my wife said, "you sure are interested in that thing tonight." I nodded, but I felt a little cold as I kept flipping. My fingers felt crampy as I spun the image, unable to stop myself, and it no longer brought me the peace of mind that it once had. This was more like the feeling I used the device to forget, and the longer I held it, the more it made the emotions in me circle like a tornado. I had eyes only for the changing colors and patterns, and as they scrolled, I saw the depths of space open up, and the eyes returned to judge me. They swirled like galaxies all their own, the white orbs climbing up out of the depths of the void. The veins pulsed in the pale pools, beating to the tune of their own phantom heartbeat. I wanted to stop, but I was powerless as I saw that Cheshire Cat's smile oozing up as well. The teeth grinned wetly, drawing up at the corners as they ogled me. The teeth groaned like trees in a high wind, the mouth becoming a rictus as it continued to grow. The closer it came, the faster my hands moved. My fingers cramped, but they still worked as a blurry mechanism, faster and faster, closer and closer, the eyes and mouth rising from the void as my movements seemed to summon them into the world. I couldn't tell if I was leaning in closer or they were getting bigger, but the longer I turned it, the more it encompassed my whole existence. When someone suddenly covered the object in my hand, taking it away from me in one smooth motion, I was both relieved and infuriated. I was in bed, completely unsure of how I'd gotten there, with my wife looking down on me with concern. "I think you've played with your toy enough for one night," she said, taking it over to my desk and setting it down. I smiled at her, a single tear sliding down my face, but inside, I wanted to jump up and throttle her. For the first time in my life, I wanted to hit her. I wanted to slam her head against the desk until she stopped moving, and then I wanted to pick up that toy and start moving the pieces again. I railed against the feelings, but they kept surging forward like eels just below the surface. She must have seen something when she looked back, because she paused before coming back to bed. Her look was strange, almost fearful, but she settled as I adjusted my face into something more normal. "What's gotten into you lately?" she asked, coming to bed as I pulled myself back to reality. "Just working too much lately," I stuttered, getting up as I got into my pajamas. Even as I got ready, I couldn't help but glance at the Karmagami. It was just sitting there, calling to me, begging to be touched, but I turned away as I went to lay next to my wife. The urge to hurt her had passed, and as we settled into bed, I felt like my old self again. I just needed a little distance from my favorite worry stone, and as I drifted off, I made a mental note to just let it sit there tomorrow. I closed my eyes and opened them in a dream void. I was floating naked in space, a long umbilicus sprouting from my navel. I was drifting, moving towards the last thing I expected to find out there. It got bigger the closer I floated, and I expected that it would suddenly burst open and reveal a bright flash of light. Maybe this was where the eyes came drifting from, though I'd certainly never seen it on the stickered background of my fidget toy. The door was massive, roughly 20 feet tall, and it only got bigger the closer I got. As it loomed up before me, I suddenly found myself not wanting to sit in that shadow. I didn't understand how it still had a shadow. Did things have shadows in space? I didn't know, but I didn't want to come anywhere near this thing, as little say as I seemed to have in the matter. It opened suddenly, as I had expected, bathing my eyes in star-dazzling light. As I shaded my eyes to see what was coming through, I saw those glittering teeth as they opened wide and came down loudly around me. I came awake with a deep gasp, finding only my sleeping wife and the dark room. It was still on the desk then, that hateful pyramid, but I don't believe it stayed there long. When I woke up the next morning, my fingers ached, and I was already spinning the galaxies in my hand. My arms were shaking from exertion, the eyes and mouth already growing as they threatened to break the bonds of the Karmagami. I threw it away before I could think better of it, and when it burst against the wall, my wife snorted before falling back asleep. I just sat there for a moment, hands extended, not sure where I'd found the nerve. It was the last thing I had wanted to do, but now that it was star-strewn pieces on the ground, I felt more at peace than I had in days. It couldn't haunt me anymore, couldn't make my fingers cramp, my head ache, but even as I slid back under the covers, I could feel my fingers wanting to work the puzzle yet again. When I woke up and found it sitting on the desk, right where my wife had left it, I almost cried. Over the next few days, the little thing was my obsession, despite my better judgment. If I was awake, the little puzzle was spinning, spinning, spinning in my hands. My pages were forgotten, my family ignored. I couldn't help it. My mind was consumed by nothing so much as freeing whatever was trapped inside this thing, even though I was truly terrified of it. I would come to the precipice, the eyes ready to pop free of the canvas which held them, only to drop it before the snapping teeth could bite me. I would resist its pull for a few minutes, an hour at the most, but then I'd come to and find it in my hand yet again. My wife stopped nagging me about it after the second day, just sighing disgustedly anytime she saw me fiddling with it. At some point, she left to take the kids to school, and they didn't come back. I was aware of them the same way I was aware that every 8 hours I needed to eat, but I don't think it truly registered as something to be worried about. The phone was ignored, sometimes my body functions as well, and before long I was simply sitting on the living room floor in my own filth, my fingers rustling the drapes a little as they worked the picture at an eye-watering pace. I'm in one of my little breaks now, the device thrown against the wall as I try to resist the urge to use it. I took the time to get this down, hoping it would find someone, anyone, who might be having a similar problem. Sometimes the things that bring us joy are also the thing that destroys us. I don't know what sort of otherworldly being resides in this hunk of plastic and adhesive pictures, but it gets closer and closer to being born every time I pick the Karmagami up. For your own sake, if you ever see the eyes, don't fall into the same trap that has me. If you see the eyes, throw it away and forget it by any means possible.
A warm fire, good company, a cup of coffee, a nice, cozy blanket. Who could ask for anything more? We've all had our fair share of ups and downs, but sometimes those are times that are made better by good companions, especially when those companions are children. But today, we'll find out what happens when the subject of today's story loses track of his kiddo and can't explain where he's gone. So let's ponder the strange graffiti left by someone who misses their daddy.
I can't explain it, but he's been here the whole time. No one believed me. My wife thought I was insane, but he's been here the whole time. My son, Dale, was 5 when he went missing. We were at the park by our flat when it happened. Park may be too grand a word for it, but that's what Dale always called it. In reality, it was a big plastic play structure with a couple of slides, a climbing wall, and a sand pit. The whole thing is surrounded by a 15 by 15 fence with a couple of benches for parents to sit on inside. That's where I sat that day, scrolling through Reddit and finishing my cigarette. Dale was playing with a couple of neighborhood kids, their parents sitting on the other benches, so they didn't have to breathe in my smoke. I looked up in time to see him go beneath the play structure, into an area they call the cave. The cave is an enclosed area beneath the structure, with a roof that was comfortably close for a kid and downright claustrophobic for an adult. I heard my phone chirp and looked back down to see a text from my wife. She'd gotten home from work and wanted Dale and me to come help with the groceries. I pitched my cigarette over the fence and called for Dale. "Come on, Dale. Mom's waiting for us." No response. "Come on, Dale. If you can't listen, we won't be able to come back tomorrow." Usually this would have brought him running. Playing outside was his favorite pastime, but there was still no answer. Both of his playmates came out the other side, giggling and laughing as they acted out whatever game they were playing, and I asked if they'd seen Dale. Alicia, a dark-haired girl who was missing her front teeth, lisped, "He's still in the cave, Mr. Darwith." So I hunkered my nearly 6-foot frame, looked into the dark underbelly of the play structure, and called for Dale to come out. "Come on, Dale, we really have to go. Mom's waiting on us." I still didn't think anything was amiss, other than Dale trying to squeeze in a few more minutes of playtime. I expected him to giggle and poke his head out, baiting me into chasing him or crawling into the cave. He knew that as big as I was, it would be funny to watch me try to get under the structure and run him out, a game we played often. Instead, there was only silence. So I sighed and hunkered down on the damp sand to crawl under to get him. I heard the other two parents chuckle as they watched me, my back scraping at the bottom of the structure as I crawled towards the entrance to the cave. I didn't mind playing with Dale, but this was a little much. I was tired from my night shift the day before, and my back was sore from lifting freight all night. I resigned myself to having a stern talking to with him on the way home about not listening and crawled into the dark opening of the cave. As I passed from the lighted world outside, the afternoon sun cut slants across my face through the boards of the structure as I entered the darkness of the cave. I felt a crawling sensation on my neck suddenly. Thought I might have picked up a spider, and I ran a hand over to knock him off. There was nothing there, but the feeling wouldn't abate. It felt like my hackles were up, that ancient feeling of predators nearby putting me on edge, and it took everything I had to keep dragging myself through the space. It was only about 5 feet of blackness, but the space was preternaturally dark. It was the weirdest I had felt in years. Was it always this dark in here? I'd crawled through here before, but I didn't remember it being this black. Worse still, I didn't feel like I was alone in here. Of course I'm not alone, I reminded myself. I came in here to get Dale. As I crawled through, I began to doubt that he was still in here, and the sense that something else lived here wouldn't so easily be put aside. I felt like something hateful lived here, something that was even now hungry and slobbering. My goal went from getting Dale to getting the hell out of the space, and I came out the other side, expecting to be dragged back and consumed any minute. I stood up, wiping the dirt off my knees, as the air puffed out of me loudly. It could have easily been mistaken for exertion, but I'd be a fool to pretend it was anything but fear. I expected my son to pop out and laugh at his silly old dad then, but he was still nowhere to be found. "Dale?" I called, my voice becoming fearful after what I'd experienced. "Dale!" The other parents looked up, hearing the jagged quality of my voice, and rose to see if everything was okay. I can't find my son," I told them, and they told me not to panic as we searched the structure. My wife came walking up just as I started getting frantic, and she must have sensed my concern as she caught sight of me. She called the police then, and as I ran to check the woods, I heard her say that hateful phrase for the first time. "Our son's gone missing. Please send help." Half an hour later, 2 cars pulled up and a couple of officers came to render assistance. I had searched behind the flats, in the scraggy woods nearby, around the little retention pond that I always told Dale to keep away from, and was just about to start knocking on doors when I saw them. They wanted to talk to me being the last to see Dale, and the officer in charge sent 2 of his men to check nearby houses as they asked me questions for the next few minutes. Where had I seen him? What was he wearing? Was there anyone suspicious around? Who were his mates? Where might he have gone off to? Did he run away often? And all the time they assured me that they would find him, and not to panic. I answered their questions honestly, but I knew that he couldn't have left the play park. Dale was small for his age. I told them so, and despite all my misgivings with the flat we lived in, they had done one thing that I thanked them for. The clasp on the gate was too heavy for a little tyke to push up. Dale had struggled with it before, but I knew he couldn't have left without help. The other parents said they hadn't seen him come out or seen anyone lurking around the playground that day. So the police searched. They searched the play park, the surrounding flats, the woods, and the whole area, basically retreading the ground I had already walked. As night began to fall, they called in more officers and began to canvass the wider area. My wife and I were distraught. Dale was our first and only child, but as the day stretched on, it seemed less and less likely that they would find him. I'm not ashamed to say that I took Dale's disappearance poorly. My wife was stoic through it all, but I knew she was hurting. He was her baby, and she had carried him for 9 months, but I think she held a lot of her sorrow in because she saw me floundering. I became like a ghost in my own home. Eventually I went back to work, but my performance suffered. It only takes a little effort to load things onto a truck, but I was falling behind, missing quotas, and making trucks late. The supervisor was a mate from primary school, fortunately for me, and he saw that I wasn't doing well. He suggested counseling and told me it might help, but I didn't want to tell some stranger about my problems. A year passed, my wife and I growing distant as the days went by, and as the anniversary of Dale's disappearance drew closer, I finally really screwed things up at work. I can't even say that it wasn't my fault, because it absolutely was. I was operating a lift, something I'd done since I got certified at 19, and as I backed out with a load, I hit a riser. It wasn't a hard hit, just a bump really, but the legs on that particular riser, as it turned out, were getting ready to give way. The riser collapsed in spectacular fashion, and when it fell on one of my co-workers. He lived. They managed to get the pallets off of him before they crushed him, but it broke his collarbone, and he had to be hospitalized. My supervisor was furious, but I could tell he was trying to hold back in the face of my sincere grief. I'm recommending you take a couple of weeks unpaid leave. If it were anyone else, I'd hand them their walking papers here and now, but I know you need help more than you need a trip to the unemployment line. Take these 2 weeks, sort your life out, and return to work. If this happens again, mate, I ain't gonna have a choice. I couldn't look at him. His pity was worse than his anger, and I knew I needed to do something. I nodded, mumbling a thank you, and he showed me out of his office. I walked around for the rest of the night, trying to figure out what I was going to tell my wife, and finding nothing. She would be mad, probably mad enough to push her to leave me. But as the sun started to peek over the horizon, I knew there wasn't much else I could do. She was just as mad as I'd thought she'd be, but her pity was just as hard to look at as my supervisor's had been. He's gone. Dale is gone, and making yourself a martyr over it won't change the fact. You still have insurance. Get some counseling. Figure this out. I need you back. Not just back at work, but back here. I miss him too, but digging into these wounds won't make it any better. Get some help, for both our sakes. There was something unsaid beneath that statement, and I understood it, but wasn't sure what to do about it. I spent the next 4 days in a blackout state. I had found my therapy at the bottom of a bottle, something I had avoided up to that point. With no job to go to, I just stayed at home and drank my pain away. My wife's patience finally ran out. After 2 days of watching me hunker on the couch like a sot, she told me she was going to see her mother for a few days, and suggested I sort myself out while she was gone. If I come home and you're still like this, I can't promise I'll be back for long. Once she was gone, I spent most of my day in a fermented haze. That's how, on the 5th day, I found myself buzzed and sitting on the same bench I had been on when I told Dale we needed to leave. It was early afternoon, and the play park was empty, thank God. It wasn't the first time I had just come to sit here, and the other parents often found excuses to leave with their kids when I came to wallow in my grief. I was the sad father who came back to the place he'd suffered most, and I really hoped the park had been empty when I got here. Even in my current state, I didn't want anyone to see me like this. It was embarrassing, and it might frighten some of the children if I came weaving into the park smelling like a distillery. I was staring at the play structure, thinking to myself that it might be time to get some help after all. When I first saw it, it was just 8 words, but those 8 words sobered me up faster than any cold shower ever could. On the side of the slide, in rough marker, someone had written, "Where have you gone, Daddy? I miss you." I just sat there, staring for what felt like an eternity, and as the tears came, the alcohol came up as well. My tears fell nakedly into the pile of sick that sat between my legs, and as the rage bubbled up in me, it felt like they were almost burned away. Someone was mocking me, mocking my son's loss, and as I staggered towards the super's office, I was madder than I had any right to be. Mr. Vidner, the super for the complex, always reminded me of one of the hobbits from The Lord of the Rings. He was short, fat, had a curly brown ring of hair around the bald spot on his crown that got bigger every year, and when he sat at his desk, it was like a child sitting in his father's chair. He nearly fell out of that chair when I slammed his office door, his expression of confused anger becoming one of confused fear as he looked on my face. He was a small man, and the sight of a large, angry drunk in his office reminded him of his stature rather quickly. "Someone has written hateful graffiti on your play park, and I want to know what you intend to do about it." He took a minute or two to collect his thoughts before asking what the hell I was talking about. I took him out to have a look, leading him to the slide in question, and he looked taken aback as he read the words. "Who would do such a thing?" he asked, more to himself than anyone. The way he side-eyed me, I could tell he thought I might have done it myself, but one look at my face made him rethink it before he said it. "I'll take care of it immediately, Mr. Dawes. In the meantime, why don't you go get some rest? You look under the weather." He had the decency not to call me a drunk out in the open, and I conceded the matter as I went home to sober up a little. As night began to fall, some undetermined amount of time later, I sat up from the couch and listened to the 5 or 6 stout cans rattle angrily to the floor. By the headache and the mealy taste in my mouth, I had not gone home and sobered up. As I moved into the kitchen to make something for dinner, I remembered the words on the slide and felt angry all over again. As the meat pie I had taken out of the freezer spun in the microwave, I wondered if Vidner had taken care of it like he said he would. I wondered if he'd painted over it or washed it away or how he had done it. Were the words still sitting there on that slide? As the microwave dinged, I resolved to go find out, and took my pie and plastic fork on a little field trip. I watched the steam roll off the top as I walked down to the little park, the night air alive with crickets and night birds. It would have been pretty if I hadn't been in such despair. The trees were losing their autumn leaves, becoming bare and skeletal, and the air was crisp enough to make my undershirt unadvisable. My bare feet slapped at the concrete as I walked away from my flat, and the closer I got, the better the view of the offending slide. The words were gone, the pressure washer having left the slide a little lighter for its effort, but as I came through the gate, I saw that something else had been added to the side of the structure. It looked like the same marker strokes, the handwriting big and childish, and as I read it, I felt a growl rumble in my throat. "I saw you today, Daddy. I saw you, but you didn't see me." I looked around as the wind rattled the nearby tree, expecting to see a group of snickering youths as they watched me. This had teenagers written all over it, and as the pie slipped out of my hand, I loosed my shout at the sky. Why? Why did they devil me like this? Was this a game to them? When I was a kid, we would never have done something like this to anyone, let alone a grieving father. The dark offered up no answers, but the side of the play park did when I turned back. Beneath the first message, another, smaller message was written in the same childish scrawl. The longer I looked at it, the more I recognized it. How many times had I watched my son scribble words in his reader just that way, filling in the workbook pages in big, looping script as he prepared to go to kindergarten. "Daddy, I can see you, but you can't see me. Please help me. It's scary here." I hunkered on my knees in the sand, looking at the words as I ran my fingers over them. They looked just like his, and as I felt a splinter catch in the pad of my thumb, I pulled it back sharply. There was no way he could be here. There was no way that he could have been hiding here for a year. But as I watched the playset, I had no doubt that he had written those words. "Dale," I said, my voice quavery as I glanced into the shadowy depths of the playground, Dale!" I shouted a little louder, casting around as I tried to find him. I walked around to the other side, stumbling in the gritty sand as it sucked at my feet. My head was full of rails, and my words slurred even to my own ears. There were doubtlessly people looking down through their curtains at me as I capered like a sot drunk, but I didn't care. My boy was here. He was here somewhere, and I needed to find him. I tripped then, going face down in the sand, and when I came up, I saw a new message on the wet-looking plasterwood. It was hard to see in the shadows that I sat in, but as I got closer, I put my trembling fingers on it to make sure it was real. My fingers came away tacky, the tips black as if they had touched wet marker. "I need you to come get me, Daddy. I'm stuck in the sad swamps, and I need help." "Excuse me, sir. Everything all right here?" As their flashlights hit me, I squinted, but the words were like a brand across my eyes. The sad swamps was what Dale called the swamps of sorrow from his favorite movie, The Never-Ending Story. We had watched it about 1,000 times, and when the VHS that I had owned as a kid finally broke in the VCR, we had searched for it on DVD until we found it at a local thrift store. He watched it every day before his afternoon nap, and I imagined that he could just about quote it word for word. Seeing the words "sad swamps" made me certain that it was Dale talking. But how? How could he be talking to me from... The light was right in my face now, and I pulled up a hand to block it. "Some of your neighbors were worried. You were faring poorly, Mr. Dawes. They heard you shouting and wanted us to come check on you." They were being kind. It seemed that everyone was being kind these days to poor old drunk Mr. Dawes. But I didn't have time for them. I'd seen something under the edge of the play park, half a word that was buried in the shadows. It was his latest message, and as I staggered towards it a little, I hoped it would tell me how to get to him. "What happened?" one of them asked in his jovial tone as he leaned down. "Why flock you out after you came home snookered?" "Well, we can get you a place to sleep it off, sir. Never..." He had put a hand on my shoulder, but I pulled away from him as I tried to see the words that were written beneath the structure. It was just 6 words, but I couldn't see the last one, and the last one seemed very important. The police grabbed a hold of me, but I fought to get away as I tried to see that last word. I got as close as I could, both catching me under an arm as they pulled me away from the structure, and finally I saw it. I repeated it again and again as they put me in the back of the car, all the fight out of me now, wanting to commit it to memory before my drink-addled brain made a muck of it. "We'll phone the missus and let her know that she can pick you up in the tank, Mr. Dawes. If she don't wanna, then I guess you're sobering up on a bench for the night, so long as you don't try any more of that." I ignored them as we left the parking lot, my flat disappearing behind us as I repeated those 6 words like a mantra. "Look for me inside the cave." The police hadn't been wrong. My wife was livid. She came down to the station, her clothes clearly thrown on hastily, and glowered at me through the bars of the holding cell. It was just me in there with a few old gaffers, and they were snoring in a corner as I slouched on the bench. I was still imprinting those words on my brain, mumbling them like a magic spell, when I heard her voice and looked up into her scowling face. "I can't believe you've done this. It isn't enough that you get sent home from work, that you do nothing but blunder around like an old tramp, and that you won't get any help for yourself. But now you go and get yourself tossed in the drunk tank. I'm done, Malcolm. Do you understand me? This is the last straw. I won't stay here and watch you destroy yourself." "He's alive," I rasped out, and when she looked back at me, I saw all the anger leak out of her, only to be replaced with pity. "I miss him too, just as much as you do, but you have to let him go. It's been a year, Malcolm. He's not coming home. It wasn't your fault what happened to him. You have to stop blaming yourself for this. He's been leaving me messages at the play park, Stephanie. I can prove it. Come with me and I'll show you. We can find him. We can be a family again. We can... But she cut me off with the first sob I'd heard from her in months. I'm leaving, Malcolm. When they release you in the morning, don't call me. Go back to the flat. Go to your mother's house. Go to hell for all I care. I can't watch you do this anymore. She left me there with the other drunks, but I'd already decided what I had to do. They turned me loose in the morning, and after a brisk walk home, I got the things I'd need. I brought a torch, some string, and a big hunting knife I'd had since I was a teenager, and set off for the play park. It was early morning, and I had the place to myself, save for the pigeons still gobbling at my spilled pie remains. I didn't see any new graffiti, but I didn't need any. I knew where Dale was, and as I got on my hands and knees, I crawled around the playground and into the cave. Even in my assuredness, I felt foolish as I moved into the cave. It was dark, but I could still see the light streaming in from the other side. I didn't feel that same sense of foreboding like I had before. No sense of monsters coming to gobble me up, and I turned on the torch as I checked out the corners. The cave was a box of 4 walls with a roof of thick plastic overhead, and I should have been able to see all 4 walls. 3 of the walls were normal enough, but as I looked to the west-facing wall, I was aware of another opening that led into a space that shouldn't exist. An opening between that led into deeper darkness. As my torch turned against the encroaching blackness, I turned my body in a ponderous circle and started crawling into it. If I meant to get my son back, I would need to hobble into the sad swamp and come out the other side. In contrast to the dark cave behind me, the space I entered was pitch black. The edges of my light curled oddly, the darkness seeming to retreat around the edges like felt as I moved in deeper. I wasn't underground. I was still heading forward, but given the dimensions of the play structure, the place I crawled shouldn't exist. The length was wrong. The longer I crawled, the more I expected to wake up and find that I had fallen asleep in the drunk tank. The space was cramped, but felt vast as it stretched on. It was like an abandoned underground cave, the claustrophobic passage threatening to collapse on me at any minute. Besides being black dark, it was also utterly silent. Besides the crunch of my knees as they moved over the sand, no other sounds seemed to exist. My own labored breathing seemed to be absorbed by that thick midnight around me, and every painful drag of my body sent a spasm of need through me. It was a primal need, a need to stand at my full height and stretch my arms up, a way to dissipate the confining gloom that hung around me. The same part of my brain made it pretty clear, however, how bad an idea that would be. What if my hands should pass into that darkness and never return? What if the darkness came back with the hand? I kept crawling into that inky soup, wondering if I would simply wander here forever. It was pitch outside the protective beam of my torch, and with every struggling shuffle, I wondered why I didn't turn around and go back. Nothing could survive down here. Nothing could live in this pitch blackness. If I didn't go back now, I'd never find my way out, and be forced to wander endlessly in this void until my torch went out. And then what? I knew I wasn't alone when I heard the soft scuff of feet on sand. I looked into the black expanse, expecting to see the beast that had terrified me the last time I found myself in this nothing. The beam of my torch didn't go very far. At the end of the light, I could hear the scuff of bare feet on sand, though. Something was coming towards me, and I wasn't sure what I was hoping to find. Would it be my son, or would it be a monster to end my journey? When a dirty, half-starved little boy buried me in a hug that circled my shoulders, I knew I'd found him. "Dale?" I whispered, but he could only nod and cry against me. I didn't waste time or breath. I just scooped him up and didn't stop moving until I was back in the lighted world of the play park. As we moved, I could feel that clawing, penetrating glare from behind me. Something had noticed I was taking its prize, and they were unhappy. I kept crawling, kept pulling, but I could hear those scrabbling feet as they kicked up sand. They were getting closer now, their growl loud and thunderous, and on a whim, I turned my torch on them. Bathed in the light, they yelped wildly and kicked up sand as they backpedaled. I didn't dare look back to see what was tailing me. I put on a burst of speed, crawling like our lives depended on it, and when I collapsed in the light of day, I was aware of people shouting at me to get out of there. Their kids were asking who I was and why I was so dirty, but they must have thought I was a bum. When they saw Dale, they tried to take him from me, but I held on like my life depended on it. And when they finally recognized us, I heard their anger turn to surprise. They took us both to the hospital, and I'm glad to say that aside from being underfed and very dirty, Dale was completely fine. My wife came to the hospital, and we both cried as she apologized for doubting me. I refused it, telling her she had nothing to apologize for. I doubted myself. I fell into the bottle and nearly lost myself in my grief. I should be apologizing to you for putting you through this for the last year. She sat with me at the hospital, both of us afraid to take our eyes off Dale as he sat placidly in his hospital bed. I asked him about what he had gone through, but he couldn't tell me much. He said that he got lost in the cave, and he crawled and crawled until he came out in the play park again. Only it wasn't his play park. The play park he found was different, and me and his friends were gone. The sky was sort of purple, and the clouds were too thick-looking to be real. I couldn't get the gate open, but that was probably good. There were these big things that would come by like living shadows, and they would look at me like I was an animal in the zoo. I drank some water from a gross puddle, but there was no food. Sometimes I went to sleep in the cave, but I always felt like something was watching me in there. It never tried to hurt me, but it always felt like I was hiding and waiting for someone to catch me. I thought I was going to starve before I heard you breathing in the cave. I had to run away to get away from some shadow people who were looking for me, and I heard you down there and went to see what the sound was. I asked him about the messages, and he said he had found some kind of marker in the sand over there, and that was about the time he started seeing a shadow inside the play park. I knew it was you. Somehow I just knew it was you, but you couldn't see me. So I started writing messages, hoping you would see them. I guess you found them. The strangest part is that Dale swears he was only there for a week. He says he kept going back into the cave, but he only slept a few times while he was away. What's more, the doctors say he doesn't appear to have grown in the time he was gone. His dental records and growth structure are the same as when he had a checkup about a month before he disappeared. I'm glad to have Dale back, but I don't let him play in the cave anymore. We still visit the play park, and I still let him slide on the slides and run on the structure like he used to, but he's forbidden to go underneath anymore. It's a rule he doesn't mind following, lest he get lost in those dark tunnels for a second time.
Oh, good stories like that always put me in the mood for a nap. How about you? Think maybe a nap might be in your future? Family history is always a little important. We've got photo albums and stories and maybe a homestead, maybe family legends passed down. Well, today's story is a little something like that. So, let's find out about our good friend and his letters in the attic. I inherited my parents' old house about a year ago. As a single guy in his mid-20s, this was quite a windfall. My mom had died of a stroke in the upstairs bedroom, a room I kept mostly locked up. I never knew my dad. He split before I was born, but the house was something he left to my mom before disappearing. It was a house that had been in his family for generations, and it was the only piece of my father that I had left. My grandparents have been dead since before I was born, and my father was an only child. That being said, there was no real family to inherit the family estate, except for my mother and I. As an only child myself, my father had never really got around to siring any other brothers or sisters for me. I had never really wanted for much. Dad's estate took care of the bills, my education, and the upkeep of the house. I always kind of wished he had stuck around if he'd gone that far, but I suppose it had finally caught up with him. Mom always said that Dad was an eccentric, a scientist who studied weird stuff for a research facility, and whatever he did must have paid well, because I'd made it all the way through college without even touching the trust fund that Mom had set aside for me. And now I had an 8-bedroom, 3-bath mansion in need of some serious renovations. I decided to start with the attic. The attic had always interested me, even when I was a kid. I used to play up there, looking into the old chests and peeking into armoires and scaring myself with make-believe ghost stories. It was nice up there, though. The stained glass window that overlooked the street always made little rainbows on the wooden floor just for me. I wanted to clean it up a little bit and build an office up there so I could do my accounting and bookkeeping in peace. The problem was that it was structurally unstable. The wall was a crumbling old brick, the mortar trying to let go for the last 40 years or so. I was afraid it wouldn't take much more than one good windstorm to knock it in, and I really wanted to fix it up and work my way down. As I started cleaning it out, I was delighted to find that the attic might actually pay for its own renovations. It was packed with old furniture and antiques that I found some interest for with the local antique dealers. I took a few pictures on my phone and sent some to the local antique shops. They seemed all the more enthralled to get their hands on them. I separated off the stuff I wanted to sell, keeping a small pile of things that I did not. After a couple of days of men with dollies coming in and out of the house, I found myself about $25,000 richer. The old antiques had more than paid for the facelift, and I started looking at supplies to replace the old brick with. I didn't know if I'd have to replace the beams behind it, but I suspected that I might. Mom told me that Dad had said the attic was one of the few original parts of the house, which had apparently been built in the late 1700s. It was one of the first large homes to be constructed in the area, and his ancestors had received it from some fellow after working the land for him. They had been less indentured servants and more live-in caretakers. The man had hundreds of acres, a large farm, and several dairy cows that needed to be taken care of. My dad's forebears and their children had been more than up to the task, having recently emigrated from Ireland. When he had left it all to them in the will, they had suddenly become very rich and very powerful in what was an up-and-coming part of the world. That would make the attic nearly 300 years old, and the fact that it was still standing was a marvel in of itself. I had talked with a friend of mine who was a member of code enforcement for the city, and he had said to be careful when I started taking down the bricks. He said he was pretty certain they weren't load-bearing, but if the attic was as old as I had said, then it would be an accident waiting to happen. I'd been up in the attic during all kinds of weather, and I'd never seen it so much as sway in the wind. Whoever had built it had done some amazing work, and had actually built it to last. As I set to work taking down the first of the bricks, I did so with an ear out in case I needed to run. I had barely set my hammer to work when I saw something sticking out between a loose brick. It appeared to be an envelope, an old and yellow thing that likely would have crumbled to nothing had it not been sealed up in the wall. I reached out for it, wiping masonry dust off of it as I looked at the front. It was signed, "To my child," from Marcus Krim, and it was dated 1934. This gave me pause. As far as I knew, there was only one Marcus Krim that had ever lived in this house, and he had been my father. To my knowledge, though, he hadn't even been born in 1934. I set the letter aside, not really sure what to make of it, and kept working. The wall appeared to be held up not by wooden beams, but metal beams. That struck me as weird, because the means to do so in the 1700s would have been very difficult to achieve. They were crude metal beams, to be sure, but they were very thick and very sturdy, and had likely taken someone a very long time to put into place, without a crane or some sort of tools. However the architect had managed it, this was tremendous. I would save a lot of my recent windfall by not having to replace the wooden beams that I had assumed would be there, and decided that the flaky wall was just a product of its time. I was halfway through the north face of the wall when I found another letter. The front of this one read, "To my child, from Marcus Krem, 1984. The date on the letter seemed reasonable. My father would have been about 12 years old in 1984, but I doubted that he was writing letters and putting them in the masonry. I set it aside, wanting to get back to work, but it was hard not to open it to see what it contained. This one looked a lot newer than the other one, and I supposed it had spent a lot less time in the wall. Why my father was leaving letters for me inside the attic wall, I didn't know, but I supposed that when I was done for the day, I might sit down and see what he had written me. By midday, I had found 5 other letters, and my curiosity was piqued. I had found one from 1984, one from 1934, one from 1956, and another one from 1890. There was also a 5th from 1954. They had been stuffed in the wall behind loose bricks, popping out as I smashed up the wall with my sledgehammer, and as I broke for lunch, I decided that it might be time to have a look at them. I didn't know if this was some elaborate joke someone was playing on me or not, but the idea of getting letters from my father, a man that I had never known, was intriguing. Maybe the dates were code or something, and I wondered if there was some other treasure to be found in the house, besides the antiques in the attic, that was. I decided to open the letter from 1984 first, it being the closest to today's date. Inside was a handwritten letter in what I recognized as my father's meticulous script. I had seen some of his journals in the library, writings on physics and scientific theory, and I was familiar with the way that he wrote. He marked the envelope with a stamp, though I had no idea why, and it had been sealed with wax that was light as I broke it. Hello. As I have not learned your gender yet, your mother insists that it be kept a secret, I'll just call you Child. I suspect you have questions, and I wish I could answer all of them, but I fear this letter will be a poor explanation. Your mother may have told you that I was involved with an organization studying scientific principles. One of the principles they were interested in was time travel. It wasn't something I believed in, but I was willing to take their money and study their theories. I thought the concept was so much hogwash, but as we began to make breakthroughs, I had to admit that there was merit to it. I began to get excited, thinking we might actually break the secret of passing backwards and forwards in time. On the day of testing, we all drew straws to see who would be the one to test the device. I drew the short straw, so I was placed inside the chamber. I pray they did not send anyone after me, because it appears that something has gone terribly wrong. I closed my eyes in 1998 and opened them again in 1984. We'd done it. We could go back in time. But there was a problem. I had no way to return, and it appeared that my means of time travel was unstable. I arrived in December 1984, but 3 days later I was in September 1984. I was jumping backwards in time, little hops at first, but I suspected they might become progressively stronger as time went on. I don't know how to contact you, or if you'll ever find this letter, but I know the house has existed for at least 200 years. If I leave a letter in the attic, somewhere it's not likely to be stumbled across until someone is looking for something else, maybe you'll find it, and you'll know that I didn't abandon you and your mother. You'll know what actually happened. I'm going to break into your grandparents' house tonight and hide this in the attic. I remember that tonight was when they left me at my sitter's house and went out to see a late movie, so there should be more than enough time to get in and leave the letter in the wall of the attic. I hope it finds you well, and I hope that you are well. Sincerely, Marcus Krem. I was speechless for a moment, not sure what to make of it. Was this real? I'd known my father was a little eccentric. Mother said he towed the line between genius and crazy, but this was out there. Had my father been playing some elaborate joke before he left? Had he been trying to trick a small child into thinking that his father was just a time traveler and not a deadbeat? I didn't know, but it only made me more curious to see the other notes. I shifted through them until I came to the one from 1956. It was the next one in chronological order and seemed to be the best place to pick up the story. I opened it with a finger, wincing as the old paper sliced me a little, but I sucked at the paper cut as I spilled the paper onto the old desk. A few drops pattered onto the blotter, but the letter was spared, and as I sucked at it, I read what I had written there. Child, I've spent the last week shifting backwards every few days. Sometimes I would stay in a spot for days, sometimes it was seconds, but it seems I'm destined to live my life backwards. I always seem to stay in the same town, the town I grew up in, and it's odd to watch the town slowly grow younger, opening your eyes to see the town shrinking, a building at a time. I spent 2 weeks leaping backwards at various speeds, but when I finally came to rest in March of 1956, I felt jet-lagged. The town was half the size it had been. The cars as different from the turn of the century as they would be in the early 1900s. People looked at me strangely, my clothes likely appearing odd, but my money still worked. The teller would get a shock when he realized that they had a bill that wouldn't be circulated for 40 years, but I needed to eat. I didn't have a lot of money when I traveled, $100 and a couple of 20s in my wallet, but as the cost of things goes down, the money stretches a little further. Your grandfather, my dad, is so young. I saw him playing outside the house, a boy of maybe 10 or 11, and it was hard not to hail him and talk to him. I plan to break into the house again when the family is gone and leave this letter in the wall of the attic. I better do it soon. Who knows how long I'll have before I travel again. I hope you're doing well, and hope your mother is also well. It's strange to talk to someone you've never met, but I hope these letters shed some light on where I've been and why I haven't been in your life. I was beginning to think the notes had been left by my mother, but how had she so expertly duplicated his handwriting? All of Dad's journals were written like this, the same meticulous script, and it even sounded like the voice I'd always given him when I read his journals. He would sound like a scientist, like my science teacher had when I was in school, and as I reached for the next letter, I came across the one from 1934. The envelope was ancient-looking, the outside yellowed and sealed in the same wax the others had been. The wax on this one was brittle with age, and it crumbled under my fingers as I broke it. I started to slide my finger under the adhesive, but looked in the desk till I found the letter opener I remembered seeing there. A quick slash, and I had the note in my hand. Child, I went to sleep 2 days after delivering the letter to the wall, and woke up 60 years in the past. This was the longest jump I've ever made, and I had to write this one quickly before it sent me sailing off again. The town looks more like Mayberry from the Andy Griffith Show than the bustling city I remember. Main Street is here, as is the post office and the police station, but everything else has changed. There are stores, but they seem less grand than the ones here before them. The house is still here, and I can see my grandfather as he sits on the lawn with my grandmother, both of them in their senior year of high school. Grandpa will get his draft letter in 6 years, taking him out of the steel mill before the explosion that kills so many, saving him and probably saving me from not being born. Grandma will give birth to my father a year after that, and Grandpa will come back from France with a few scars and many memories to regale his son and later his grandson with. I never knew my great-grandfather, not well enough, and it's odd to see them as they go about their lives. I've seen men going into the house the last few days, men doing work on the study on the second floor, and have managed to get a pair of white overalls and a cap from a clothesline. Tomorrow I will mingle with them and drop this letter in the wall, if I'm not years farther from where I started by then. I sorted the remaining letters, my work forgotten, and decided on the one from 1890. It was the next one in sequence, though that sequence was far out of whack now. My hands shook a little as I opened it with the letter opener. Fake or not, someone had gone to a lot of trouble to set this up, and the story was so good that I had to know how it ended. My work was forgotten, the mystery too much for me to put down now. As the wax seal fell to brittle shards on the desk, I took out the thick and uncomfortable paper that had been laid into the equally heavy envelope. Child, it appears I sealed my letter in the wall at just the right time. The house was fumigated the next day, and it would have been nearly impossible to get back in. I also traveled again 4 days later, and this was one of my most hectic trips. I would be stuck in a time for a day or two, but just as I would pen a letter, I would be dragged backwards into something else. I've started trading my money for gold and silver as I go farther and farther back. I'll soon come to a time when paper money means nothing, and then I might as well burn the notes to keep me warm. Gold, however, maintains its value, as does silver, and so I now have a few actual dollars left, and some mintings of gold and silver on my person. I've got them hidden in a backpack that also seems to travel with me. I wish I had experimented with this a little more, but even though these letters are decades apart, I've really only lost a month at the most. It feels like just last week when I opened my eyes in 1984, but I'm becoming worried that I might be slowing down a little. This last trip has brought me to 1890, and the town is little more than a general store, a saloon, and a collection of frontier businesses. I had to steal more clothes. My modern attire marked me as an outsider. I'm thankful that I traded for gold. My money would be useless out here, but gold is always useful. The house is still here too, but I've skipped 4 or 5 generations. The house is now a plantation, the land worked by field hands, and the house is set considerably out of town. I went there to seek field work, but they thought I was a cousin who'd come to call. They put me up, showing a lot of the old world hospitality I've always heard so much about, which will make it easier to hide this letter. I hope I come to rest soon. I hope this stops. I go to sleep, I blink, and my heart is filled with dread on when I will open my eyes again. I hope you're well, and I hope you're living a better life than I. I exhaled, looking at the last letter. This one was marked 1854, and it appeared it was the last one I had. As I picked it up, a thought occurred to me. How many more letters could there be in these walls? How many more could there be that covered dates in between the ones I had found? I was no longer skeptical. Quite the contrary, I was hungry for more, and as I split this one open, I held the brittle paper gently, afraid it would fall apart before I got the chance to read it. Child, the traveling is definitely slowing down. I spent 3 months with my forebears in 1890. After that, I spent a month in 1880, 2 months in 1870, and now I've landed in 1854. I've returned to the house again, claiming to be a cousin, and it's odd to see the same people I saw in the 1890s, but years younger. The matron who invited me in is now a mere slip of a girl. Her brother, maimed in the war, is now a healthy young man, passionate about states' rights and the laws that govern man. I'm embarrassed to report that the field hands I saw earlier have been replaced with slaves, but I suppose that was to be expected. They accepted me into their home again, and I suppose I will stay here until I travel again. I hope you are well, and I hope you do not hate me too much. That was it, but I felt like I knew where I could find other letters. It was late into the night when all the bricks were torn down, and I looked amongst the rubble for any signs of paperwork. I'd started out being very careful, an archaeologist looking for old bones, but after hours of fruitless plinking, I began to level the walls with abandon. I no longer listened for the groans of old boards or the crash of the ceiling. The iron bracings had held the attic up this long. They would do it a while longer. I searched and searched, looking for something, and when I saw metal glinting beside a bracing, I went to it and found a lockbox made of rusted old iron. It was a relic, the metal so old it had begun to disintegrate in places, and I was careful as I knocked the lock off and pulled at the lid. I didn't think it would open for a terrible moment, but as it squealed apart like a funhouse door, I saw a tube inside with a wax cap at the end. Someone had written 1775 on the outside, and I opened it carefully as I dumped the fragile paper out beside the rest. If the paper from the last one had been fragile, then this one was almost elven. It felt like skin, and it was so thin that I could almost see through it. The ink was thick and flaky, clearly done with a real pen, and as I read it, I realized I had come to the end, or maybe the beginning. Child, 1770. I've come back as far as I'm able. The last year was a series of travels, back and back and back. Sometimes I might get as much as a week in one time, but usually it was hours. It seemed, however, that I have come to rest at last. I've been living on the land that will one day be our family home, and I realize that there is no old benefactor waiting for us to come and settle here. The land is still mostly trees, but I've come to the spot where our house will soon stand. I went into town, the closest town I could find, and purchased it for what I would consider a pittance. The man at the trade office seemed surprised by the amount of gold I had on my person, but it would seem like nothing to someone from our time. I had co-workers who had begun to lay gold back for the coming millennium, sure that the banks would crash and the money would be useless, but out here, money is nothing more but paper and ink. I was able to buy 100 acres and secure enough supplies to build the house and start the farm. I've shown them how to make metal beams, something that I took for granted in my world of metal and glass. The house will be strong, no wooden beams to break and bend, and I secured enough strong backs to help me build it. 1773. The construction is done, for the most part. The attic was difficult to build with their current level of technology, but I think they did okay. The house looks just like it always has, and as we set up the barn and the fields, I have begun to loan money to those who are in need. The interest alone has made me wealthy and have become quite well known in the area. The workers I've hired have settled land nearby, and I believe they are establishing the town that will one day encompass this house. 1775. I've lived here for 5 years and have not traveled once in all that time. I think perhaps whatever moved me has dissipated, and I'm now here for good. The town is doing well. They've established a general store and are now a steady trade route on the road west. I have men who work the land for me, who tend the cows and the sheep as I sit in my mansion and rake in the profits. Life is good, but I am aware of what is to come. I'm no fool, and I know where this path will take me. 1780. I saw them today. They came to the house, asking for work. My 8 times great-grandfather came onto the porch with his hat in his hand and begged me for a job. He said his wife would be happy to be my cook, and his children would help with the land. That sounded fine to me. Most young men who helped me build the house and work the land have gone to fight in the Revolutionary War, and have been struggling to keep up with the chores around here. Thomas has 10 children, a good Irish Catholic family, and the youngest is old enough to help with the day-to-day affairs of the farm. I agreed to hire them on immediately. I am the generous benefactor my family legend speaks of, and I will be dead in the next 15 years. I may have stopped traveling, but I can feel my body aging faster than it should. 15 years is a long time, but I'm sure it will seem like no time at all to me. 1785. The war has been over for 2 years, but a lot of the men who went to fight haven't come back. I'm going to finish this letter and put it in the attic while I still have the strength to do so. I'm barely 50, but I look like a man in his 70s. I can barely make it up the stairs on a good day. I don't know how I will live another 10 years, but I know that if I don't get this on the wall, it may be my last chance. It's sobering to realize that I am the one who's responsible for my family's wealth, the one who made it possible for those who come before me to live in relative ease, but I suppose that that's the way of it. If you ever find this, I hope you won't hate me too much. It was not my intention to leave you, but I see now that I would have likely been a terrible father. My work held too much of my attention to ever take you to a baseball game or sit with you and spend an afternoon on the couch. I would have neglected you, and for that I am sorry. This, it appears, is my gift to you. Use it well. You never know when you might be called upon to make your own history. I love you, and I hope you are well. Yours always, Marcus Krim. I sat at the desk and just looked at the collection of letters. It was my dad. He had built the house. He had set our family up. Then he had died without telling them who he was. It was unthinkable, and I realized I had no way to prove any of it. There would be no records going back that far. The original owner of the house had lived before the town had, and the receipt of bill of sale would not have survived. I suddenly wished that Mom was here. She would have wanted to see the letters and would have likely believed them without question. I wished a lot of people were still there, but there was no one to substantiate these claims. I wondered if this was how Dad had felt as he walked to town to begin building his house. Had he felt so utterly alone, knowing that his only real family was still 10 years away in a place that he had never seen? I felt so alone, so utterly desolate, and I sat there looking at the letters and thinking until the sun made rainbows through the stained glass. As I did, I saw them fall on something I had missed. It was wedged far in the back, behind one of the braces, and I walked towards it like it might bite. It was another tube, this one carefully placed so that it wouldn't be jostled or broken when the time came for repairs. I opened it, and inside was a beautiful oil painting of a man sitting in the parlor downstairs. The blues looked a little different, the curtains in the style of the late 1700s, but the man sitting in a wing-back chair was someone I knew. I'd seen his picture before, but he had traded his white coat for a dark, rich suit. His hair was short, more orderly, and he'd grown a mustache. But I would have known him, even if he had a beard. It was my dad, and I knew what I would find when I carefully flipped the painting over. Marcus C. Rim, commissioned 1774 by Warren Fritz. It's framed downstairs now, as are the letters Dad left to me. I think I cherish them more than the house, as well as the knowledge that Dad never really left us. He's always been here, making sure our way was smooth from a gap of generations. I don't know if you can hear him over the microphone, but during that last story, one of our furry friends here came to join us. He's just another cozy part of the day, one of my favorites, just like you all. I would hope that everyone listening has found that special someone that really just sets your heart on fire. I know I have several people in my life that certainly bring me joy, and of course, there's all of you, my constant companions. But if you found that certain someone, I certainly hope It's a little easier than the subject of today's story. After all, sometimes we have to go to our dreams to find our dream girl. She walks through the halls of my high school. Her hair is a halo of gold. She runs through my dreams as I slumber, my sanity threatening to fold. I rubbed the bridge of my nose and took another sip of coffee. It was strong, black, and warm from sitting untouched for so long. I looked back at what I had written, 12 verses written over 5 years, and each more troubling than the last. This poem would likely be my unfinished work, a labor of love that would remain my final mystery. But the poem's subject is, herself, a mystery to me. Lisa, the darling girl of my dreams, who steals a little more of my soul every night, has been with me for 5 long years. Lisa, the girl who no longer exists. I stroll through the halls of academia. I move through the silence that creeps. She glides like a goddess of reason, this angel who comes when I sleep. I wrote those words on January 25th, 2014. I was a sophomore in high school, still struggling to mold my burgeoning talent while dealing with the growing flames of my teenage hormones. For years, I'd been told that I wrote well, English teachers and creative writing teachers praising my work, but they always said that it lacked a focus that they hoped I would find in time. Your ideas are scattered, your thoughts uncoordinated, and for someone with your raw talent, these are threads that we hope you will find. That's what my 9th grade English teacher wrote on my final assignment, a short story about the ideas of servitude but not slavery, right under the lurid red A she'd written on the paper. Miss Harper had often told me that I had talent, and told me that she expected me to focus that talent if I ever thought to make something of myself in the writer trade. On that day, as I sat at the picnic table outside the cafeteria and wrote ideas in my notebook, I found some of those threads she was talking about. I had slept deeply the night before, and dreamed vividly as I did sometimes. In the dreams, I was walking through the halls of Chester C. Smith High School, and on that day, I walked alone. There was none of the usual tropey at school in your underwear sort of thing, but the school did have a slightly lucid feel to it. I felt like I was underwater sometimes, everything having a slightly wavy feeling to it. As I walked, I began to become more and more sure that something was watching me. There was no one there. The silence in the school was almost oppressive, but at the edge of my vision, I could just make out the form of a girl following me. She slid silently along the walls, glided noiselessly through the world. Several times as I whipped around suddenly, I could see her hiding from me. Those few glimpses were enough to tell me 2 things. She was human, and she was lovely. She stalks through my dreams like a shadow, a hunting cat ready to pounce. Her mind is a mystery to me. Her very secrecy, humanity renounced. I had the dream again a week later. It was much the same, walking through the silent halls of high school, the terrain wavering like aquarium weeds as this ghostly girl stalked me. I did not indicate that I was aware of her, not turning to speak or looking for her, but just studying her out of the corner of my eye. She was blonde, corn silk hair spilling down her back in a sheet, and her clothes were a pair of jeans and a simple white shirt with no particular design. She seemed to be about my age, but could have been older, I suppose. There was a way about her that made me think she was older than I in my mind. Like when you meet someone who's had to grow up very quickly and been forced to cast their childhood aside before they were comfortable. She followed me silently until I woke up, and when I sat up, I grabbed for my notepad on the nightstand and wrote those 4 lines. I wouldn't revisit her for another 3 months. Her secrecy seems to be prudent, for her shelter is not solely her own. I have seen what lurks in the shadows, and it threatens to evict her from home. Writing about the Dream Girl was what I had named her after the second verse, had lit a fire in me, it seemed. Suddenly, I wrote pieces for every school contest, submitted poems for every poetry club event, and I gained a small amount of celebrity amongst the students that followed in those circles. My teachers had always praised my work, but as my peers noticed my talent, I started to see this as more than a hobby. I began to believe that I might be able to make it outside of my high school community. When the spring poetry contest was announced, a contest held for students nationwide, I threw myself into it, heart and soul. I stayed up for 3 days, crafting the perfect poem, the most significant work of my life. When I hit send on the submission email, I slumped back into my chair and let the euphoria wash over me. It was Saturday night. I was exhausted after the efforts of birthing my perfect work into the world, and all I wanted to do was sleep. I crawled into bed and fell into the deep and untroubled sleep of the dead for 12 hours. I learned more about her world in those 12 hours than I wanted to. I walked through the doors of the high school and saw the ethereal backdrop of my dream again. I was comfortable here. It was comfortable here. The quiet serenity of the place was a change from the steady flow of ideas and couplets running through my head lately. But something was missing. I looked behind me, expecting to see her dodge away or hide from me. But she wasn't there. This was the only time I could remember truly being alone in this place. And it was a little strange. To feel so alien in a place that you occupy every day is a strange feeling indeed. But I felt my steps taking me steadily into the school once more, so I let myself be led wherever the dream would take me. As I walked, I was aware of a noise. The fact that there was a noise at all was strange, but the type of noise was stranger still. It was a vibration, a rhythmic thumping from under my feet, and it disturbed the place's unusual stillness. Thump, thump, thump. Then silence. A few minutes or hours or days would pass, and then it would happen again. Thump, 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 followed by a return to the same silence. As I explored the high school, I found myself drawn to the boiler room over by my civics class. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the thumping was probably coming from the boiler room. It was a large subterranean basement used by the custodians for storing extra chemicals or broken machinery that they were hoping to fix someday. It was also where students of a less academic cast went to make out or smoke between classes, since it lacked a fire alarm. When I got close to the boiler room, I heard the thumping more clearly and realized I'd been right. There was definitely something in the boiler room, something big, and I doubted it was a group of teenagers necking a little too enthusiastically. When I wrapped my hands around the door handle, though, I was immediately thrown backwards into the lockers against the far wall as something came barreling through that door. It was her, the Dream Girl, and she turned to glare at me, teeth bared in a feral challenge. When she saw who I was, she stopped growling and scrambled down the hall towards my English class. I sat against the lockers, my backside aching where it had connected with the lockers, and listened to something big and angry make its way up the stairs. I didn't want to know what was making that noise, but I was powerless to do anything but sit there against the lockers. I'm not one to freeze up in dreams. I'm familiar with lucid dreaming, and probably led to me becoming a little too comfortable in this dream. But as whatever it was lumbered angrily up from the depths, I realized a fear I hadn't known since childhood. The slap on my shoulder brought me out of those fears, and as the blonde girl thrust her hand at me and spoke the first few words of our strange relationship, "If you don't want to die, then you'd better start running." She offered me a hand, and a moment later, we were flying down the polished halls. As we rounded the corner, I heard something burst through the doors. It sounded like an angry piece of construction equipment as it followed us, chewing up everything that got in its way. My guide took us down a hallway that led to another hallway that led to another hallway, taking corners at random before finally wrenching open the door to the custodial closet and pushing both of us inside. She closed the door behind us, cracking it a little as she peeked out into the hallway. All I could do was lean against the wall and pant. I was tired. I didn't ever recall becoming tired in a dream before, and as I sat, I realized my butt still hurt where I had hit it. I wanted to ask things, wanted to know what was chasing us, and why it was chasing us, but as the thumping footsteps got closer to our hidden cubby, I was filled once more with that sense of dread. I moved up beside her, peeking out into the hallway as a creature like nothing I had ever seen before dragged itself into view. It was shadow. It was darkness. And as its form slither crawled past us, I looked at its amorphous boundlessness. She closed the door quietly before it came even with us, and sat back in the closet as the creature moved off into a different part of the school. We sat in silence for nearly 10 minutes before I dared to speak. "What the hell was that?" She looked at me quizzically, and I feared that she was incapable of hearing me for a moment. I would later come to realize how long it had been since she had actually had anyone to talk to. She closed her eyes as I repeated my question and seemed to savor the sounds my words made. She relished them, burned them into her memory, rolled around in them like a dog with a smell that it likes. And when she'd finally absorbed them as much as possible, she answered me, "I don't know. I've been calling it shade for however long it is that I've been here." Her voice was thick with disuse, but it was cultured with just a hint of an accent that I couldn't place. She told me her name was Lisa. She told me that she believed she was 16, but she couldn't be sure. She told me that she'd been here for as long as she could remember. She told me that she could move between dreams. "Between dreams?" I asked. "What do you mean?" Instead of telling me, she showed me. Her hand looked like a starfish when she set it against the back wall of the janitor's closet. The pinkness of her skin stood out against the dingy wall and made it all the more apparent when the paint began to crumble and the wall started to melt away. Suddenly, there was sunlight in the closet, thick and buttery against the dingy darkness. We were looking at a field of flowers that stretched on to infinity. I put my hand against the image, expecting resistance, but instead fell into the landscape of fragrant technicolor flowers. Lisa came in behind me, and as she did, the portal back to the high school closed. "Where are we?" She shrugged. "Some other dream. She has it pretty often. As long as we stay out of the area where she is, then she'll never know we're here." I had a million questions to ask her, too many to organize right away, but just as I'd found my voice again, someone was shaking me, and my mom was asking if I was hungry and might like some dinner. It was 2 weeks, 2 weeks of hoping and praying before the dream returned. I sit at the edge of a precipice, looking at the world from afar. I am a prisoner of my reality. My passage to her world has been barred. I spent those 2 weeks in a haze. I received word that my poem had gone to nationals, and I think that my distracted nature was seen as dazed relief. They thought I was happy. They thought I was living in the clouds. In my mind, however, I just wanted to go back to the dream. She needed me, and I needed to know more about her. I spent those 2 weeks analyzing what I now knew about the dream. The first was that whatever happened in the dream happened in real life. I had woken up the next morning with a large bruise on my backside and a similar bruise on my shoulder. Either I had hurt myself outside the dream, and it had translated into the dream itself, something I doubted, or I could be hurt inside the dream. The second thing was far more urgent. I needed to find out how to instigate the dream. I tried recreating the events that had led to the dream, dragging myself to the edge of collapse or overworking my mind without rest until I dropped, but it was no use. 2 weeks later, I hadn't had so much as a dream that I could remember in the little amount of sleep that I'd gotten. As I went to sleep that night, I focused all my mental faculties on the dream itself, how it had felt, the landscape I'd been in, and as I focused, I could feel my mind slipping off to sleep. I awoke in the high school again. I ran through the halls, heedless of what else might find me, and it wasn't long before she tracked me down again. She dropped into the hallway before me, seemingly from nowhere, and when she saw me, her face split into a wide grin. She ran to me, wrapping me in her arms. She smelled ethereal as I wrapped my arms around her as well, like old dust or sour memories or the universe itself. I didn't think I'd ever see you again, she said, and in her voice I heard relief. Her world lies alongside my own, my dreams the key to her realm. But how did she come to reside here? Her own dreams have been overwhelmed. She took me back to the field of flowers. Then she answered my questions. I asked her probably about 1,000,000 questions as we sat together in the field. She had found a tree that sprang from the flowers, and we sat there as she told me her story. Till that moment, I believed she was older than I, maybe by as much as 5 years. But as she spoke, her girlhood came back to her. She drew her knees in close, her blonde hair creating a curtain through which she peeked at me, and she seemed embarrassed by the story. No, not embarrassed, I guess. I now realize she was afraid that telling it to me would make it real. She'd had her own dream once. She couldn't remember what had happened before it, but she could remember there being a before. She had dreamed inside a castle and was a princess, with knights and wizards at her command, dragons and goblins that needed slaying. Sometimes she had stood on the battlements and looked pretty as the knights fought for her favor. Sometimes she put on armor and killed the dragons herself, leading her knights on grand adventures. Whatever she was doing, she was happy, and the dream had returned almost every night. It returned because I wanted it to. It came back because I thought about it before bed, and so my mind opened the portal to this place. These dreams aren't normal dreams. You can get hurt in them. You can even die in them. When you dream here, your mind takes you to a place in the spirit world, the after. I don't know how, so don't ask, but I know that it is so. She had dreamed this dream for quite some time. Years, she said. Then, one day, something different happened. Her knights had encountered something on the edge of her kingdom, and it had actually killed some of them. None of my knights had ever died in my dream. They would get hurt sometimes, but a wizard would always come along to heal them. When they didn't come back, and the wizard couldn't make them come back, I knew this was different. I knew this was something else. For 2 nights, it had destroyed her dream world. When it came to the castle, I was too afraid to fight it. It was dark and scary, and it just looked wrong. I hid inside the castle, unable to face it, and as it broke down my walls, I closed my eyes and tried to wake up. I tried and tried, but it wouldn't happen. And when it finally got me, I woke up somewhere else. That was when she discovered that she could make portals between dreams. She'd thrown her splayed hand out against the wall of the castle as the bulbous thing had loomed over her, and suddenly a circle had appeared in the wall. It showed a desert in the throes of a sandstorm, and she jumped through it without a second thought. She'd woken up in someone else's dream. She floats like a dandelion dreamer, adrift on the seas of a dream, never to return to her own mind, her world never to be as it seems. I visited with her often over the next few years. The dreams came almost every night, and as we explored, we grew closer. She told me that no matter how much she tried, she couldn't wake up. She could sleep, still needed to sleep actually, but as for eating and drinking, she found that she didn't need those things anymore. The bulbous creature followed her no matter where she went, but she was able to avoid it, and over time, she just became used to living inside other people's dreams. She didn't know how long she'd done it, and she didn't care. I was one of the first people to talk to her, but I was the only one who believed her, believed she was more than a figment of their imagination. This dream girl has stolen my senses. Her beauty has taken my mind. I know that life is ephemeral, but I know that her heart must be mine. I didn't acknowledge right away that I was falling for her, but I think I knew deep down. My poems became all about her, this ephemeral goddess that walked my dreams, and my fans responded. I had members of the art club asking to paint her for my description. I had droves of female fans asking me to tell them who she was. They believed that she was someone at the school that I was spending my nights with. I had people who had read my works asking about her, my moonlight girlfriend, but I gave them very little information. For her part, I could tell that she appreciated my company, but she seemed afraid to get too close to me. As months became years, she showed me sights that defied description. She took me to dreamscapes so beautiful that I could hardly grasp them, and to places so wondrous I could scarcely describe them. But she refused to tell me what she was looking for. Her hand would creep into mine on occasions, though, and I remembered being filled with a warmth each time she touched me. Inevitably, our nights would be cut short by the appearance of the shadow creature. He would blunder upon us and screamily suck his way around, groping, as we would flee until he moved away. She never fought him and said it would be useless to try, but I somehow knew that she would never really be safe as long as it existed. As time passed, I noticed her become more and more melancholy. The one night I asked what was troubling her, she took my hand, interlocking our fingers, and looked at me across what seemed like 1,000 years. "I don't want this to be my life anymore. I want to hold your hand, feel its texture, and know that I won't be left alone when the dawn comes. I want to leave this place. I'm sick of looking over my shoulder for the shadow creature. I want a life." She sounded so sad, so adrift, but I had no idea how to help her. She longs to leave her forever, this kingdom ethereum so deep. She wishes to walk in the moonlight, to walk her own dreams as she sleeps. I was in my senior year when she left forever. I came into the dream high school that I'd come to know so well, and found her sitting in an empty classroom. She was seated in one of the desks, and at first I thought she was asleep. When she turned to look at me, though, I could see that she was deep in contemplation. She looked up at me with real hope, and I realized that something had happened while I was gone. I think I need to destroy the shade. She detailed her plans, how if she killed it, she might be allowed to go back to her dream and wake up. But all I could hear was the first lines of her suicide note. I tried to reason with her, talk her out of this needless waste of life, but she wouldn't hear of it. I had clearly underestimated her resolve, and every argument against it only seemed to infuriate her more. "I thought you were different. I thought you understood how important this was to me. Well, to hell with you then. I'm going, with or without you." She walked out, and I let her go, unable to say any more. When I woke up, I found myself fighting sleep for the next few days. By then, I was almost out of high school, about to start college, in fact, and my poems had appeared in magazines and compilations since early in the year. I woke up to my familiar bedroom and immediately went to find a cup of coffee. For the next 4 days, I drank coffee, took caffeine pills. My face stung from where I had slapped it, and I fought the urge to sleep. I didn't want to go back to that place and see what had happened to her. The thought that she was dead scared me, but the thought that she might become something worse after she killed the shade scared me even more. Eventually, I lost the battle, and I was forced to submit to sleep. When I returned to the halls, it was like the first time. I felt no one. The silence was oppressive. In the ethereal halls, I wonder. The only sounds are my own. I listen for her, but hear nothing. I find myself all alone. I searched for her for hours. I combed the school, every classroom, every mop closet, from the library to the gym, but she was nowhere to be found. I quickly found myself running through the halls, calling her name as I threw caution to the wind, wanting nothing but the solace of her voice, of her presence. I wanted to see her, to know she was okay, to apologize for my cowardice, a cowardice I was still indulging even then. I would not let myself think about the cellar. But I'm past that now. I'm going to find her. Tonight, I'm going into that basement to settle this once and for all. My parents will likely find this, as well as my last poem, and if they do, I hope they send it to my editor so he can publish what will likely be my last work. I'm going in there. I'm going to bring Lisa out, or I'm going to die trying.
I will have my dream girl.
Well, it sounds like it might be sleepy kitty season, because someone is still purring up a storm, but has decided to take a nap in my lap. I think we've got time for one more story before I take the two of us off for a cozy little rest. I'm sure I don't have to tell any of you that sometimes hair can be a real pain. It grows too fast, it grows unevenly, it's not the color we'd like, or maybe there's some additional color that wasn't there the year before. But if you find a good barber, it's always important to stay in his good graces. However, if your barber is anything like the one in today's story, maybe it's best to just steer clear. Let's hope you never have to discover why the barber cuts your hair for free.
Mr. Faskel has cut my hair since I moved to the city about 3 years ago. He's an older guy, maybe 50s or 60s, and he possesses that look and drawl that make me think he's from up north somewhere. He could be from New York, Maine, or even the Great Lakes area, but I never asked him where. He's not a big guy, maybe $1.20 in the rain, and he cuts my hair just the way I like it. High and tight on the sides, leave me some on top so whoever I'm sleeping with has something to play with, and neaten up my sideburns. I can't grow a real beard, or he'd probably trim that for me too. The best part is, he does it all for free. Hard to believe, I know, but it seems there was a cost after all. Our relationship started easily enough. I had an interview with the city, maintenance and custodial, and I wanted to look sharp for the interview. Everything other than that paid nothing, or barely nothing, and I really wanted to lock this job down. I had a nice set of interview clothes, some comfortable business shoes, and a winning smile. Now all I needed was a sharp haircut to seal the deal. That's where the problem lies. My hair grows abnormally fast. It always has, and when I was a kid, my dad used to bemoan the fact. He made jokes about going to barber school or buying stock in master cuts, but he always understood that when it was time for a cut, it was time for a cut. If you let it go longer than 2 weeks without a cut, it just turned into a shapeless mass. By the end of week 3, I looked like a sheepdog, and Dad would look over his paper and sigh before saying that it was time to take me to the barber. Faskel's Hair and Beards was about a block from my house, and when I stuck my head in to get their prices, Mr. Faskel looked up and smiled at me over a pile of hair he was sweeping up. Then, suddenly, he took a deep breath, and when he opened his eyes again, I asked if everything was okay. "Just fine, young man. Say, you look like a man in need of a haircut. Am I right?" I told him he sure was, and he invited me in and told me to have a seat. He had about 1,000,000 questions on my first visit. No, I didn't usually let it get this long. I liked it this way, but a little long on the top. No, I didn't use any special shampoo, just the dandruff shampoo from the Dollar General. No, I wasn't really prone to dry scalp, but a fella can never be too careful. On and on and on and on until finally it was done. He had cut it just right, the perfect length, the perfect fade, everything. I asked him what I owed him, and he told me it was free. "Come on," I said, "you gotta charge me something." "I let my customers decide what they can afford, so whatever you can afford is fine with me. Think of it as a tip." I was okay with that, and I walked out with a free haircut, while Mr. Faskel waved me out with a $10 tip. I left with a spring in my step. I felt like a new man, and I was ready for that job interview. I went home, got a shower, and when I looked in the mirror, I knew I had this. The next time I went to see Mr. Faskel, I left him a $20 tip and told him that it was all thanks to him that I'd gotten my awesome new job. For the next couple of years, I always went to Mr. Faskel's when I needed a cut. If I had a date coming up, I went to see Mr. Faskel. Promotion interview at work? Faskel. I told my friends about the shop. I went there just to get touch-ups and talk with the old fella. In no time at all, Mr. Faskel and I were friends. He liked the same sporting team I did, watched a lot of the same movies and TV shows I did, and even liked a lot of the same classic rock that I did. It was great, and I always looked forward to my bi-monthly haircut. Then, about 2 months ago, it all changed. I had come in to get my bi-monthly haircut, telling Mr. Faskel about the previous week as he cut and styled my hair. He was always meticulous, getting everything just right as he cut and trimmed, and when he turned me around to look in the mirror, it was the same way I'd gotten it for the last 3 years. I thanked him, handed him a 20, and told him I'd see him next time. "Of course," Mr. Faskel said, sweeping up the hair. "Come back any time." I was leaving, almost a block up the street, when I realized I didn't have my sunglasses. They were my brand new Oakleys, too, and they'd cost quite a bit of cash. I remembered having them when I came in, taking them off my head, and setting them down at the station that Mr. Faskel used. No problem, I thought. I'll just go back and get them. I stepped in, saying I'd forgotten my sunglasses and was just going to grab them. That's when I saw them. Mr. Faskel was looking up guiltily, his eyes panicked. He was down on all fours, eating the hair he had swept up off the ground, like he was a cow in the field. When he turned, I could see pieces of hair sticking to his lip like accusations. He stood up, wiping himself off and brushing at his mouth as he tried to explain. "Now, I know what this looks like, and I'll admit that, yes, I was eating your hair, but you have to understand your hair is what I look forward to. I don't eat just anyone's hair. Well, I used to. Now I can't wait to see you come in so I can eat something good. Why are you looking at me like that? I'm not crazy. I'm not crazy," he shouted, getting up as he stalked towards me. He seemed to realize that saying that made him sound crazy, so he switched gears. Haven't I always done good work for you? There's nowhere in this town where you could get a haircut for less than $25. I cut your hair for tips. I've cut your hair for the dollars in your pocket. I've been good to you, and you've been a good customer. Let's just pretend this never happened, okay? Let's just go back to... But I didn't hear the rest. I snatched up my sunglasses and was out the door before he could say another word. I spent a while thinking about that, and the more I processed it, the worse it seemed to get. It began to haunt my dreams, seeing him bent over, eating the hair straight off the floor, looking back at me and grinning with my hair in his teeth. And I'd wake up in a cold sweat. I know it's not a particularly scary dream, but it freaked me the hell out. I don't really like it when people put hair in their mouth. I had a girl in elementary school who used to chew on her pigtails, and it bred in me a lifetime phobia. Just the thought of wet hair in someone's mouth makes me want to puke, and I can't even touch someone's hair without cringing if they have a wig on. I know, it's a weird collection of phobias, but they're mine. It only took a couple of weeks before I started seeing new growth. My hair just grows too fast, and after 3 weeks, my boss commented that I was looking shabby. He handed me a 20 out of his own wallet and told me to go get a trim over lunch. I took it and started looking for somewhere to get a trim. The city had quite a few shops, but it seemed like wherever I went, I caught someone looking at me out of the corner of my eye. It was never anything I could prove, just a feeling, and when I looked up, I could almost swear I'd catch a glimpse of Mr. Faskel. He was gone when I looked up, but it made me extremely paranoid. I became aware of more than a glimpse as the weeks went on. When I rode the bus to work, I caught the familiar deep inhale of someone smelling my hair. When I was standing in a lunch line, I felt my hair move as someone inhaled. When I was at Walmart buying groceries, someone actually touched my hair, but they were gone when I turned around. It led me to become something of a recluse, and I only left the house if it was to go to work. Over time, my hair grew out, and I decided that I would have to get another cut. I went to bed, setting my alarm so I could get up early enough to go to Master Cuts down on Bonnie. It was Saturday. I had the day off, and I had chores to do before the business of relaxation. As I slipped off to sleep, I fell into a familiar dream.
A dream that had plagued me for weeks. I was sitting in the chair at Mr. Faskel's, the cape falling around me like a spider web, and the old man asking if it was too tight. I didn't say anything. I was too scared to speak. And as the scissors began to clip, I trembled in fear. I didn't dare look back at the old man. I just knew his real face would be replaced by a monstrous visage, and I would wake up panting and looking around for nothing at all. When the alarm went off, I went to the bathroom to splash some water on my face and start the shower. My bare shoulders itched, and when I went to wipe it off, I noticed there was hair clinging to my sweaty hand. Not a lot, just leavings, like the leavings you find after a haircut. I ran to the bathroom and found that my hair was cut just the way I liked it. The sides were high and tight. The top was manageable but still thick, and my bangs were perfect. Everything was just as it usually was, and I felt a cold chill run through me that had nothing to do with the air conditioner. I called my landlord. I had the locks changed and reported to the police that someone had broken into my house and cut my hair. The police didn't really take it seriously. They made jokes about a midnight barber and asked if I'd left a tip under my pillow. I told them about Mr. Faskel, but when I gave them the address, they just shook their heads and walked away. They thought I was joking with them. They didn't believe a word of what I told them. And as I ran the shower, I remember sitting under the water for a very long time, just letting it run over me. The bits of hair flowing down the drain felt like a betrayal. 2 weeks later, I woke up to another fresh haircut. I called the police again, but they rolled their eyes and told me to calm down. I told them it was hard for me to calm down when someone was breaking into my house and cutting my hair. I demanded they go check on Mr. Faskel and told them right where the shop was, but they looked less than amused this time at the suggestion. I asked if they had talked to him yet, told them that he had been my barber for the last 3 years, but they just told me it hadn't been funny the first time, and it wasn't funny now. Why would it be funny? I asked, having to stop myself from grabbing one of them. Because Faskel's has never been opened. It's a prop for the city's revitalization project, like Cooley's Flowers across the street or Green Butcher beside it. It's just set dressing. It's never open. Mr. Faskel was a guy who owned a barbershop in the 1920s. He's dead. There's no Faskel who cuts hair. They left, and that left me pretty rattled. Mr. Faskel isn't a ghost. I know that. I have friends who go to him. I felt him touch me. He's flesh and blood, just like I am. I'm sure of it. The fact that he eats hair is incidental. The man is real, but if he isn't Mr. Faskel, then who is he? How does he keep breaking into my house? I have windows in my room, but they're barred with pieces of broom handle. I live on the 3rd floor, for God's sake. I changed the locks again. I wedged a chair under my door, and when I finally made myself calm down enough to sleep, I hoped it would end. I woke up completely bald this time. Not buzzed, not a zero guard, but bald, like someone had shaved my head in my sleep and took the hair. They got my eyebrows too, my 5 o'clock shadow, my thick sideburns. I was as smooth and hairless as a newborn baby. I don't know what to do. I can't call the cops. They won't believe me. I can't call my landlord. He's replaced the locks twice now, and he's getting angry about it. I can't afford to move. I can't leave my job. I'm stuck. What I did find, however, was a message on my nightstand. I'm sure the cops will say that I wrote it, but I know I didn't. There's hair on it. It's written in a heavy hand, like a kid's scribbles. It's done on the back of an ad for Faskel's Hair and Beards, and the implication was pretty obvious. Come see me when it grows back. If you don't, it makes no difference. I know where to find you. I think that'll just about do it for us today. Thanks, everybody, for stopping by for your daily dose of cozy horror with me, Dr. Plague. I'm sure I'll see you again tomorrow, and until then, I wish you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.